fencer. You've been producing some content on YouTube for the last year or two. I'm trying to build a
Yeah, a
timeline in
couple
my
of
mind.
years.
Um, so how did you get into fencing originally?
All right, so that's a long story. The first sport I played was touch football,
Which is Aussie
touch rugby
rules?
league,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah,
Yeah, like yeah, rugby league, basically. But you can't let 4-year-olds tackle each other, so it's touch.
yeah,
Um, and then we moved to the UK for a bit, played soccer there.
yeah.
Then we moved back, and the soccer played at my school when I moved back to Australia. Good bit rougher than the soccer played
Yeah,
in England. Worse, but rougher.
yeah. So sort of
So
the '70s style ankle smashing.
yeah, yeah, ankles if you were lucky. And
Yeah,
so like, so I was like, well, I don't want a bar of this.
yeah,
Um, so I stopped playing sport for a while, and eventually I was just like, oh, I saw fencing on TV, and I was like, well, that looks interesting. I'd like to try that. And mum and dad were like, well, that sounds expensive. So
yeah.
can we steer him away from that? And initially, so for those of you who don't know, like the ethnography of Western Sydney and the demography of it, it's even back in the 50s, it's where the government by policy tried to ensure immigrant families would go, and it's also not as wealthy as where we live now and where we've lived most of the time in the North Shore.
Just to interrupt there,
And
is the show Squinters set in Sydney, where it's sort of
I've never seen it, so I
ah
genuinely couldn't tell you. But they basically made a bet of like, well, fencing's a rich people sport. Surely they don't have it in Western Sydney, but it's also a very Italian sport. And so the local Italian soccer club had a club, and that's how I got in.
okay, yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
a very silly little kind of way to get into it. But they were like, yeah, yeah. They told me, yeah, you can do it if there's a club around, expecting there not to be.
yeah.
And then once they said that and there was a club, they kind of just didn't have an option.
Okay, so you joined the kind of Italian club. Was that foil or saber off the bat?
It was mostly foil, tiny bit of epee.
Okay, yeah,
That's still what it is today, because it's still around. It's the Marconi Club in Fairfield.
yeah,
Yeah, and like yeah, so I started with foil. Um, Year afterwards, I got this kind of new coach, and he took like one look at how I just wanted to hit the target, and was like, no, no, you should be doing epee. What are you doing in foil? And that's how I started doing epee.
okay, cool. And
Yeah.
so having fenced epee for a while, how did you end up in the kind of historical fencing space?
So, so I fenced epee for ages. So I started epee in 2011,
Yeah,
when I was 12ish, right?
yeah,
No, I can't remember
yeah,
exactly, but around then. Um, I did a bunch of fencing, won a bunch of national medals, did international stuff. Um, yeah, a lot of good times in places like Cape Town, and that was all really fun. But so I took a break after COVID.
yeah,
Oh, sorry, during COVID, played a bit of rugby. Came back. When I came back, I had done a little bit of saber for the first time, so I didn't really grow up doing saber. I got like 9 lessons when I absolutely hassled my coach
yeah.
for some, because he was quite good at coaching saber. He just didn't like doing it. Um, and so about once a year my hassling would pay off, and
No,
I'd get a saber lesson,
so you learned
and
three
I
guards and a parry riposte, and
yeah, well actually yeah basically like, and I think it's because he was trying to discourage me from doing it. His entire thing would be he'd just tell me to hit him on the head, and I'd do it, and he'd just tell me I'm too slow, and he'd just do that for about half an hour, which is completely different to when he would give me foil or epee lessons. It
yeah,
was bizarre, but so I played a bit of saber because I I but because I had a bit more money, I could kind of just do what I wanted a little bit more. And I kept playing it, and I kept being like, "There's something here that could be very fun, but this game just isn't quite for me."
Yeah.
Um, and then, and that kind of led to me going, "Well, why don't I?" There's a bunch of historical saber. Well, there's a bit of historical saber in Sydney. Why don't I take a look at that?
Yeah.
And maybe that's more closer to the game I want to play.
Yeah. Okay, so you went and checked out the local HEMA club. What was your first impressions?
Well, my first impressions, because my first engagement with HEMA wasn't looking for a club. It was when I was about 16, 17. A couple of guys at school had seen for some of the videos that were being released at
Yeah.
the time, and so that's where I got a lot of my early exposure, um, which was a combination of stuff that was like interesting and promising, but didn't look quite there yet to me, and a bunch of very interesting statements about how modern fencing works. Um, and so I kind of came in expecting that a little bit, or expecting something maybe a bit more because it had
Yeah.
been a few years. But so I came into something like that and expecting some very epee like, I guess, conventions.
Yeah.
And so and to a large extent that's kind of what what I got. And like, I didn't have any particular expectations about training because I hadn't done anything other than modern fencing that HEMA has taken a lot of its training ideas from. So I didn't really actually have any kind of expectations in that regard. Um, I The club I'm at, the Old Sword Club, is very much kind of a CLA
Yeah.
type club. So I'm familiar with that, and none of that was particularly surprising
C-
to me. But it was good to see
CLA.
it's an option.
Yeah. Just to interrupt.
Ah,
CLA's constraints-led approach, I believe, off the top of
yes,
my head. So that sort of empowering students to find their own solutions for given problems in the sport.
yeah, for given problems, and like the way you generally understand you'll do that is by creating an activity that has a goal and constraints. And you typically see this in the form of games. So the step lunge game is a fencing game that I really love, for example. But it's not strictly games. That's just the most obvious way to kind of apply the concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the basis that the Old Sword Club has run on since I started. So I had a bunch of fencing coaches that were very similar, actually. So that actually was all quite familiar to me in terms of the general lesson dynamic.
Okay. And then when did you decide to start competing in HEMA? Was that when you heard about there was a competition going on, or what was your sort of first experiences outside the club?
Well, so the first experiences outside the club were actually the Rodelli Cup competition in Melbourne,
Yeah.
which is a a teams comp. You were there for it. Run for under well, more inspired, I guess you'd say, by historical Italian fencing conventions for saber fencing in the 1890s or so.
Yeah.
And uh, I wasn't. I mean, I wanted to compete,
Mm.
but I wasn't particularly fussed on the topic until a bunch of people kind of said, well, until people pointed out to me that there weren't many comps in Sydney.
Yeah.
So come down to this, it'll be very familiar to you. Have a whirl, and I had enough kind of spare change to do it, so I just kind of did, and I treated it like going to one of the national comps I run around the country for. But I don't know, there wasn't like a particular moment. It was just kind of something I thought I'd always at some point do, but until I went there, I didn't really have a strong drive to do.
Yeah, yeah. For listeners who might not be aware, so the competition took place in a roller derby hall.
Yeah.
So a real nice punk rock riot girl aesthetic going on. It was teams of 3 or more fencers fencing in a relay, so you were invested in how other members of your team were fencing and engaged.
Yeah.
The convention was a tactical priority, but it was different to the modern conventions. So it was judged on when an attack started with the hand rather than with the foot.
Yeah, and it wasn't even specifically that so much as like, because if you feint, right, you have the feint and then the attempt to hit. And you can do both of those with one smooth extension of the hand. But it's not until after the feint is completed and you start making the actual attempt to hit that you have priority. And I made a lot.
Attack on prep was effectively boosted as a consequence of that.
Oh yeah, it was incredibly effective. And it meant that your feints had to look very real because you had to draw the parry.
Yeah.
If you didn't draw the parry, you were going to be attacked into preparation. I made a lot of bank off just realizing before anyone else did really that's kind of how the game worked.
Yeah.
I got marched a lot and it just didn't matter because I just launched my arm first and won.
Yeah. I think we met for the first time, and I met Emerald as well, who's also from the Old Sword Club, the evening before at the Gindie Sal in Melbourne, which was also an experience. For me, it was kind of like a really nice, what I like from a HEMA event, of travelling to a new city, meeting new people, fencing under a new convention that you've never come across before, and finding out where sort of your fencing strengths and weaknesses are. So like I think I'd competed under right of way like once before maybe in Paris, which is a similar experience of just trying to work out what the judges want from you on the fly. And I really like that in my fencing brain.
I enjoy it as well. It's one of the things is that once you've seen kind of right of way, its variations, and then kind of I find that the afterblow style, the more common styles of scoring in HEMA tend to the general way to play them is often still quite similar. So once you've kind of seen your 2 different kinds of right of way, which do play very differently, the colloquially called foot tempo and hand tempo. Hand tempo being what we just talked about, foot tempo being more what you see modern saber, modern foil, where if you can move first and threaten a step plunge, you'll generally retain priority. Those do play quite differently, and you have to kind of adjust accordingly. But I personally find that changing exactly how much the head worth is compared to the hand or whatever doesn't change how much I fence. Or it doesn't change much how I fence.
Yeah.
So one thing that I look forward to hopefully going to Poland is it's quite different. You have riposte priority but not attack priority, and that could be very fun to fence.
So you've got it's a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe up at the moment, which we'll link to below, and that's because you've done well in Sabre in Australia, and Australia, one of the few things most people know about it is that it's very far away from anywhere else.
Yeah.
So although there's an active scene, the cross-pollination with North America or with Europe's relatively low. I know the Perth guys, Jim Campbell, got over to London last year. Often it ends up being the guys in East Asia, in Singapore or in Hong Kong who are travelling more, I guess, because they're, again, that little bit more isolated. They might as well go to Europe if they're going to pop down to Melbourne, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're planning on getting over to Poland for a competition. Which one's that?
So specifically, the one I'm looking for is the Black Horns Cup in June.
Yeah.
Which is part of their kind of overall kind of HEMA league. And there's been a few Australians who've been able to travel. Woody went over and won Rapier in SoCal, for example. Roberson went to HLO, did decently there. And Ronald Lee went to he went to he actually went to Black Horns Cup this year. He did okay in pools, but it's just a tough comp, and he didn't quite make the cut. But like, I don't know, he got a win against Mark Wilkie, who won. Was it Albion Sabre this year? He won something in Sabre in the UK.
He's doing very well. I'd need to have a quick look at HEMA ratings exactly, but he's sort of right
but
up there in
the
top 30 or so for longsword, probably higher than that.
Yeah, it's just that Black Horns is a tough comp.
Yeah.
You can't. Yeah, you can, if you can beat one of the top Sabreurs in the world and not make it out of pools. It's a tough comp. And so like, so I've had a lot of success with the Sabre in particular here. I think I've got it's something like 16 wins and 1 loss.
You stuffed it, Marb.
Yeah, I can't believe it. Anyway, and I really enjoy fencing Sabre here, but there's a couple of things. There's most of the Sabre here is right of way Sabre. There's a couple of exceptions. There's Perth, but like if I'm going to Perth, why not? What similar, right? To how you were talking about the WA guys. If I'm going to Perth, why not just go all the way to Poland? And then Brisbane, which I've been meaning to do, but it's just one of those things where like every time there's a Brisbane comp, I've got like one of the Epeeist comps that I also have to travel for, and so it's like, well, I have to choose, and in my heart of hearts, I'll always choose Epeeist over a national level HEMA comp. And yeah, I'm really excited for the Poland comp because it's a bit different. It's, again, the rule set's very interesting. It's a really fun one where the immediate riposte has priority, and then you have also like if you hit kind of my leg, I hit you in the head. That has just an outright priority. It's not like a deductive afterblow system that makes it a good trade-off for the person hitting the head. It's more. Yeah, it's just a straight priority, and I'm really, really interested in fencing this because I think it's something very different. I really like right of way Sabre. I don't mind afterblow Sabre, but this is something I'm very excited to actually fence in, because it's something that's very different.
Yeah. Cool. Is that just you planning on coming over, or is there going to be an Australian contingent there with the Fosters out?
The Fosters, oh my god. There won't be any Fosters, I can promise you that much. I haven't heard of anyone planning anything. I hope so. I think it would be really fun to do that. I think we also have a very strong Sabre scene here. One of the things in Australia is that while longsword is still the biggest thing, it's not that, there are parts of the world where in HEMA longsword is almost the only game in town. It's very dominant from kind of a numbers perspective, numbers and interest, and in Australia that's not quite the case. It is bigger, and it's a fair bit bigger, but you have you have clubs that almost don't do it, that are like nationally quite relevant,
Yeah.
right? Which there are countries where that's just not true, and there are similar sized countries where that's just not true. So yeah, and like our saber scene, I think is very good. And so I really, and I've performed very well in that scene. I won the Rodelli Cup after the one we talked about. Um I won our local comp, which I had to beat Nelson to do it, and Nelson is the guy who beat me at the other comp. And yeah, I've just been locally very successful in saber, and decently so in rapier as well. So I've been meaning to kind of go
Broader
to an
horizons.
overseas comp, a big one, yeah, and yeah, see, and more or less represent the country in a comp overseas, which I think would be really good.
Just picking up on a thread there. So, are there more competitions taking place in Sydney these days? Um, how's it going with the Old Sword
So
Club?
so so with the old sword club, so we only ran our right of way saber competition this year, Mayhem,
Yeah.
because it was in May. Um, one of the I think there were a couple of others, but they weren't, say, on HEMA 18s. They were not competitions that were designed to be part of, run by other clubs as well. I'll be clear that they weren't designed to be part of the general kind of national or like pseudo circuit
Yeah.
that Tosk Mayhem was. So like there were other comps. I didn't do. I think there was one, maybe two. I didn't do any of them. There was one that I think was. I'm not sure if it was internal to Staccato, but they ran it, and there wasn't much in the way of kind of information on it. Glecker may have run something, but that may have been last year.
Yeah.
And that was very much something that it was only longsword, and it's I can't remember the details of it, but again, it wasn't designed to be part of the broader national apparatus
Yeah.
that ours was. Next year, though, we plan to run two events,
Oh,
which
exciting.
is yeah. So we're running Mayhem again,
Yeah.
which will be the right of way saber comp, and then we have a social fencing weekend after that, which is good. I couldn't make it last. I couldn't make that second day, but social fencing is always very fun. The next day, and the one that's the next comp, and the one that'll be, I think, quite interesting to do is, again, I really like this Polish Saber rule set as something slightly different from right of way. So the plan is, at least right now, to run. We'll definitely run a comp in November, and this is probably what it will be.
Mm-hmm.
Is it'll be a Polish rules Saber comp,
Yeah.
and then a rapier comp, which the rules for that are a little bit more up in the air. But right now, I've talked to Emerald, and we're currently leaning towards a simple system where any target is worth 2 points for a clean touch,
Mm-hmm.
or 1 point for a touch that gets afterblowed, and then a double gets washed. And then we'll set the exact uh, uh, scoring, the exact score measures,
Yeah.
whether it's to 10 or 15 or
Yeah.
whatever, later. But that's the general concept of it. And we're going to call the event the Kosciuszko Cup because it was inspired primarily by the Polish Saber rule set.
Okay.
Um, and then, for those who don't know, we have a mountain here. It's the tallest one in the country, called Mount Kosciuszko. And Kosciuszko was a Polish general who took part in a rebellion in the 1790s, I think.
Okay.
Um, I
So
think it leads to the third partition of Poland or something like that. It like and so like it's a very natural name for an Australian comp based on a Polish rule set.
that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
just to comment briefly on what you were saying about where to set the exact scoring for a victory and the length of matches and stuff. that was something that for March Hares over in Auckland, we worked out empirically. I came up with my idea of what I thought was right, and then we played it in the park, and the feedback was just, no, that's way too much fencing. We're going to run out of time. People aren't going to be playing Wacky Bat sensibly, and so I think that the value, the amount of fencing that we decided on in a match was good, and it was testing for folks, but it was something that's achievable sensibly. So that's my advice: is run it empirically.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. We didn't need to for Mayhem because, right, I had seen enough of the general concept of typical HEMA right of way saber to kind of go, okay, I know kind of the tempo of this. I think we can have, we had 5-point pulls and 8-point direct eliminations, and that worked very well. And maybe we can bring it out to 10 because we'll have a bit more room. We'll have room for another Epeeist this time, so that'll help. But we didn't need we didn't need to run that empirically because we knew how long it would take. Because we've done a bunch of that at this point. But yeah, no, it's probably a good idea for because we've run it a couple of times internally. But we haven't timed it, and your perception of a single match and its time does not bear any real relevance to running this competition that might have 100 or so matches, or however many, over the course of a whole day. And so that is very good advice. We may have reached that anyway, but we're definitely going to do it now. Cheers.
Happy to help. I had a couple more questions here, which are sort of a little bit more technical, maybe. One of the things I've noticed on the few trips when I was able to get across the Tasman and fence in Melbourne is how much Emerald's fencing, sabre fencing, improved from when we first met at Gindi Sal to Sword Camp at the end. Do you think that's down to kind of like the constraints-led approach of teaching, or a kind of double down interest, or just there being more people to play with, or your wonderful coaching? Like, where do you see that kind of improvement coming from?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. There's when the Old Sword Club started, Emerald was far and away the most experienced fencer in the club, and like even when I was there, pretty much no one there had been fencing for more than a few months at that time, except Emerald, who has fenced for a while. So when I came, Emerald just had someone far more experienced and quite athletic and yeah, with a lot of kind of knowledge to fence against, which they didn't have for a good while, at least internally in Tosk. But when I started there, nowadays it's different. We have quite a few very talented fencers now, and talented and developed fencers now. But at the time that wasn't the case. So that was a part of it. A part of it is the general philosophy behind the constraint-led approach, which leads to wanting to problem solve and wanting to kind of figure out, okay, this didn't work, or this didn't work, why? And so that there's a part of that's involved, where that leads to Emerald always wanting to, and most people who are taught in this manner, wanting to find solutions for themselves, and wanting to find solutions not just wanting to try to do the thing that failed harder and better, which is very rarely a winning solution, short term or long term. Then I think there's two other aspects, which is in the context of Sydney HEMA, a lot of it was fairly old school for a while in terms of ideas around always wanting to search for the blade.
Okay.
Always wanting to find the kind of bind concept. And Emerald learnt a lot of their fencing in this context. And I think what made it particularly interesting is Emerald didn't necessarily adopt this idea, but adopted the counter fencing to this idea. The look for the kind of counter attack into the search,
Yeah.
right? Look for the stop hit as they look to search, and a lot of ideas like that are reliant on kind of often your opponent willingly searching for the blade out of tempo, and this like in a lot of earlier Sydney HEMA, this would get you ahead in a lot of individual matches.
Yeah.
But you know, for the broader Saber scene, it wasn't. It's incredibly limited, and especially in a right of way context. But just in general, it's an incredibly limited scope of fencing, and inherently very opportunistic. So if you're not getting those opportunities, you don't touch.
Yeah.
So if the main thing that my personal coaching has been for here hasn't been to, because people will often when they talk about these ideas, they'll often talk about it in a sense of almost spectra, almost if you talk about this, then the problem is that it's too extreme on the avoiding blade contact, stop hitting side, on a technical level, and so you need to kind of move the like slider closer to the middle. Is almost how people talk about it, and I don't think that's particularly useful, because simply trying to engage the blade more doesn't mean anything on its own. It's
especially if the opponent's trying to search for your blade and to dominate it.
Yeah.
Then you're playing
Exactly.
into their strengths.
Exactly. And it's just you find this idea a lot discussing technical differences or technical preferences, and kind of first order tactical preferences, where if you're doing one thing too much, it must mean the solution is to move this kind of fencer slider and not look at the root causes of why you're doing that, and can we set up, say, a similar movement in a different tempo in a different situation to be just as valuable. And so it was less doing that and more, there was a bit of that, but it was in the context of there are times where this is not viable, so we need to work on other technical solutions. And there were other aspects then of just stuff like, well, how can we set this up so we have initiative instead of just hoping and waiting for them to engage the sword. If they're not just doing it almost automatically, can we invite them to parry, and then maybe we don't even finish the attack going forward. Maybe we start to skedaddle back and touch the arm as we do it, right? But can we be more active, more proactive even in finding this touch instead of just waiting for it to happen?
Okay. I guess my next question, sort of the way that many folks approach learning historical fencing would be, okay, I want to learn, let's say, rapier, because the Three Musketeers are cool. So I'm going to learn Rapier. What Rapier should I learn? I should learn Capoferro or Gigante or Fabrice or Thibaut, whoever you want. So I've got my book of Capoferro. Going to sit down and read it. And it'll have some ideas in there about tempo. It'll have some ideas in there about distance. Some ideas about direct attacks or feint attacks or what have you. But getting from that stage where it's effectively doing a play-by-play read to being able to diagnose what's going wrong in people's fencing. Do you have any recommendations as to how people who are club leaders or super interested can kind of develop that skill of analysing each other's fencing?
Yeah, okay, so I think, so if we're talking about getting to the point where we're looking from like the words in the book, what do what do they mean? How does this play happen? Right? The reading where you see the words about distance and describing and explaining, going from that to then being able to look at fencing and saying, oh, this is what's happening, or and being able to understand
the causes of
being able to
the causes of why
an
action is
right,
unfolding the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. Being able to understand that journey is kind of its own aspect. Where, so I think the first thing that you should do when you're coaching and when you're teaching actions is you shouldn't just describe what they are, and you shouldn't even just describe what they are and what you're trying to achieve with them. You need to approach this kind of education a bit more holistically, in terms of, so this is what you're doing, this is what you're trying to achieve. Why are you trying to achieve that, and why is this a good way to do it? Right? And so just an example of the direct thrust, right? The direct attack by thrust, absence of whatever particular foot movement you add, right? So we are extending our sword to the opponent with our tip first. The reason we do this is because it is the longest possible attack, because any attack made with the tip is fundamentally longer than the same attack made with a cut. And the reason why we want to make the longest possible attack is that this being able to make this attack means we are able to touch our opponent with our body as far back away from them as it can possibly be for that touch. Then we can even look at, well, why might you not then always hit by thrust? And there's a variety of answers, from sometimes it's physically not possible to sometimes, often on the riposte, for example. You'll see a lot of rapierists, even ones who really like the thrust, riposte by cut a lot of the time. And a lot of the time it's just, well, the value of this idea doesn't matter all that much if they're so close you're not going to be able to find a range where you can touch and they can't by pure distance anyway. So what are you saving by doing that? You might, if you can present the oblique angle given by a cut, you can shut off an entire side of the body in a way that can be much more difficult by thrust, for example.
Yeah.
And so if we explain even the thrust in this level of holistic detail, sometimes you don't have the time, that's okay. But in as much holistic detail as we can, then the student is able to piece together, I think, more quickly how everything interrelates.
Yeah.
which is then how you get to being able to look at fencing and understand what's going on, because because you have to teach technical skills as technical skills, right? You have to teach them in some degree of isolation. Even CLA does this; it just isolates it by implementing the constraints to the goal, right? And that's why CLA is so good. That's why it can be so effective. Is it naturally kind of does a lot of this. When you problem solve your way to a direct thrust, you have taught yourself why you do these things. And this goes from the technical idea to the broader tactical ideas as well. And so this is the first thing. And then from a student's perspective, it's difficult to kind of self-direct as a student just starting fencing. So it's almost difficult to, and it's a thing that I personally struggle to kind of relate to, because obviously I learned a lot of fencing theory well before I engaged in historical fencing. But this is kind of, and then once you get to here, then the main thing you want to avoid, I think, that will allow you to analyze fencing well is look at the root causes of choices. And I mean the root causes, not just like in the moment they make the touch, why do they do this? In the moment they make the touch, why is the particular touch they make the best possible one? Start by going 1 tempo, 2 tempi behind that, right? Earlier than that. And say, well, how did this person get the advantages that led to this being good? And in particular, don't discount something that doesn't get talked much about much, especially in HEMA, is the relative change of distance.
Yeah.
So even something like, if you're moving back, but I am moving forward faster than you are moving back, the relative distance is decreasing, right? And this means that if you stop, right, if we're both moving, or if I'm moving forward, you're moving back at the same rate, and you stop, you now are relatively moving forward, right? You are accelerating forward relative to me, right? Aspects like this are often overlooked, and so that's another thing I'd add. But yeah, like to give an example of what I mean by root causes is, when I was a kid, I didn't disengage much. I generally couped. These days I'm actually a lot more 50-50 on that than I used to be. But the main reason I did this...
Just to interrupt 1 second. So a disengage is when the swords are joined, you're moving your sword away from theirs. Underneath. So well, it's a disengage is when you evade the opponent's blade by going around the guard, and a coupe is when you go around the tip, which means that when you're in typical highline positions, it is under and over, but then if they drop the point, it's the inverse, right? The disengage is over the top, the coupe is under. Okay.
Right? Because that's functionally, this is actually how they are gymnastically most similar, right? If I'm in, say, 2, and my opponent's in, say, 2, the way I get around their blade going under is this movement that's far more similar to this as the coupe in 3, for example.
Sorry to interrupt.
But no, it's all good, right? But so when I did this, right, the reason I was doing this was because I was often launching my compound attack from so close that so firstly, a lot of coaches would tell me, don't coupe, disengage, because the coupe leaves you open, right? But this didn't matter, because firstly, for those who don't know, I'm about 5'5", so I was fencing mostly people much taller than me. And as a result, I would get very, very close before I bothered launching any kind of attack, even a compound attack. And so what the coupe let me do is it let me have complete freedom to ensure that I would evade the parry and then hit. And if they counterattacked, I got hit, right? but because I was a bit shorter, and because there is always a counterattack tempo in a disengage anyway, if I disengaged, I also just got hit. But I also didn't have the flexibility of, well, now I don't care how they parry, and I had to be far more alert to how they parried.
Yeah.
So from the position I was already in where I was close, I got close to try to ensure as best as possible that they would parry and not counterattack. Then I would launch my compound attack by coupe, and then typically, if I got things right, they would feel compelled to parry and I would hit. If I didn't, I often got hit, because that's just how fencing works. Sometimes, as I launched, I could tell I got it wrong, and I could cancel into a parry riposte, which is easier in a coupe, because your arm's already back. Whereas from a disengage, you have to bring it back to parry with the same depth. Whereas when I disengaged, I was commonly launching from too close to be able to see. But if I launched from further away, I tended to get counterattacked anyway, so it didn't matter. And so like this is my choices informed by all of these aspects leading up to it, which led to me heavily using the coupe. These days I disengage a bit more, and to be honest, I think it's just because I launch a little bit further away now, and I'll often do multi-tempi instead of just kind of one feint, one finish. I might feint twice, and that's a bit more facilitated by the disengage. But this is the kind of thing I mean. If a fence is getting hit by something, ask first, why are they doing X and not Y? Not why are they doing not well, why aren't they doing Y? Right? Like, they need to do Y. Sometimes that's true, but even then there's often a reason. Maybe they don't have the technical capacity to do Y yet, right? Maybe they didn't feel like Y was on against this particular fencer for whatever reason. But you want to ask your fencer this. You don't want to just assume for them why they're doing something that you don't think is ideal.
Okay. Yeah. I've got nothing to say to follow up from that. You've sunk the interview, Mark. I'm busy thinking about different types of disengages and distances, and again, it's interesting because those are challenges in fencing which, as somebody who's 6'1" on Tinder, I wouldn't have experienced, because I'm not often fencing against people who are 6'5". So it's a case for a coach of putting yourself in their shoes and trying to work out the problem that they're trying to solve in the fencing, I guess.
Yeah, and it's also kind of, well, the coupe exists for a reason, right? And you see it at the highest level, so it's a very legitimate fencing action. So don't ask the fencer why they're coupe. Well, sometimes you can ask them that. Sometimes fencers are just making very bad decisions. But really try to interrogate to yourself what their explanation might be. And if you can't find that by looking at how they're trying to fence their opponent, by looking at what leads up to this touch, right? And then by looking at and then trying to piece together an explanation from that. If you can't figure that out, just ask them. In fact, just after you figure that out, if you think you have, also ask them, just to confirm.
Yeah.
But try to find this out, because you can work a technical action 1,000 times, right? And it's just not going to matter if the fencer isn't putting themselves in situations where that technical action works.
Okay, so it's it's no good having a key if it's for the wrong door.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I mean, most fencing actions are by themselves fairly. if you look at Saber or Epee, for example, they're actually fairly. A lot of things are often technically called the same thing or different things that are actually very, very similar movements. A lot of prise de force and parries are basically the same thing.
Yeah.
For example, most extensions are you can find the same extension called just three different things depending on the context. A coupe, right? Like you can make a very similar movement as a parry 3 and riposte, right? But if you're doing it evasively, it's called a coupe. And so even within our language of fencing, we accept that actions are defined more by what they were doing a lot of the time than how they are done. Which I think if you keep that in mind, it'll also help you if you're trying to analyze a lot of fencing.
Thanks. That's about all that we've got time for today, I think. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? What's next for you? What's next for Sydney HEMA?
Well, what's next for Sydney? I don't know. It's too big. Tosk is just one club in a very large city that doesn't have as much HEMA as it probably should. But I have no idea what's next for Sydney HEMA except for what we're doing. No, I don't think in particular. I do think that I will say if you've watched so my channel is called The Prince in the Forest, and it's a fencing analysis channel, and I started doing it with Epee when I saw that there wasn't that much tactical analysis on the web, and then I quickly found out it's because most Epeists just fence and they don't watch things, and so which presented a good opportunity after I switched, right? Because HEMAers who fence also watch things, so it works out quite well. But if you want to see some fencing analysis that I personally think is very good, then I'd recommend you check out my channel, and I'll send you the link. I have that GoFundMe for trying to get to Poland to fence some saber and rapier and dagger. Actually, we finally have a couple of daggers at the club, so I've been having fun preparing with that as well. That's been very good.
Exciting.
Yeah, so that's it, I think.
So if you feel that Australian HEMA is
my headphones just turned off.
Okay, then he can't hear me. This is perfect. If you feel that Australian HEMA is overinflated on HEMA ratings, give money to Marb to go and lose in Poland. You heard it here, folks. Can you hear?
My headphones turned off.
Brilliant.
Midway through that.
Perfect.
So I genuinely didn't hear that. Like if you just saw me a gesture, it turned off. I heard a funny AI American voice say power off, and I was like, oh no.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yep.
Whatever he said.
Definitely time to wrap it up then. Thank you very much, Mark.
Okay. I'll watch this bit.
Maybe see you in Poland in June.
Hopefully. June, yeah. It'll be on my birthday, so you should bring a cake.
I will do. Alright, take care now.
Alright, see ya.